Welcome to the Holy Land and this biblical site of Tel Hazor. Now the miraculous defeat of the Israelites over this city of Hazor and other kings that joined in this battle is probably one of the most overlooked miracles in the Bible. Later on, we will see that despite this great victory, the Israelites were defeated here and many taken into captivity to Assyria because of their continual disobedience to the Lord. In this video, we'll be looking at these events and how the size and importance of this city is quite astounding. So at this biblical site, we'll be looking at the location of this place and why that's so important. We'll talk about the historical background of this location. We'll be looking at some of the amazing places of interest at this site. We'll see the key events in the Bible that took place here, and we'll end with a faith lesson in order to learn the major lessons God desires from us at this important biblical site. So I think you'll find this video very enlightening and transforming to your life. Now Tel Hazor was one of the most important cities of the Canaanites before the Israelites inhabited the land. Should just mention, we got some thunder clouds coming here, so if you hear some thunder in the background, Israel maybe is going to get a little rain, so praise the Lord, they always need rain. This Tel is located about 10 miles due north of the Sea of Galilee, and it was amazingly 10 times the size of Jerusalem and totaled 200 acres in size, about 200 football fields. And what we see today of Tel Hazor is 1/8 the size of what it once was. To the north lied most of the city, which is now a farm field. Tel Hazor is located on the Via Maris, so that was one of the main travel routes linking Africa to Asia and Europe. So that's why it was so big and so important, and that's why whoever controlled here had control of this travel route. Now Tel Hazor was the head of all the cities in Canaan, and by far the largest. Joshua 11:10 mentions that it was the head of all the kingdoms of Canaan. This means that it was the capital city of all the Canaanite cities in what is now Israel. It had everything needed to be a large, thriving city. It had water, a great climate, lush farmland, and was located on the main travel route called the Via Maris. That means the way of the sea. In fact, it was the gateway city from Europe and Asia into Canaan as travelers headed to Egypt and Africa. It was situated with a perfect view so any invading armies could be seen long before they arrived. The city is mentioned 19 times in the Bible, which shows its importance. It also rivaled Nineveh in esteem and value. There have been found 21 layers of civilizations dating back to around 2800 BC, so we can see that it has been a vitally important city for many centuries. The population of Hazor in the second millennium BC is estimated to have been around 20 to 30,000, making it the largest and most important city in the entire region. Hazor's conquest by the Israelites opened the way to the conquest and settlement of the Israelites in Canaan. The city was rebuilt and fortified by King Solomon and prospered in the days of Ahab and Jeroboam II, until its final destruction by the Assyrians in around 732 BC. It was one of 3 major cities of defense in Israel: Gezer to the south, Megiddo in the middle country, and Hazor here in the north. All 3 cities were on the Via Maris. The city is divided into 2 parts. It has the upper city and the lower city. The lower city is mainly from the Canaanite period, and the upper city has artifacts from both the Canaanite and Israelite periods. During the Israelite period, it was mainly the upper city that was inhabited. Now let's look around this site and see all the points of interest that stand out. Afterward, we'll see the amazing events that happened here as found in the Bible. The first thing we'll look at is the water system. A huge system to supply fresh water is located in the southwest side of the upper city. While it appears this system existed during the Canaanite period, it was certainly expanded by Solomon and further developed around 870 BC during the time of King Ahab. It was designed after similar inner city water systems such as in Tel Megiddo, Gezer, and Lachish. It is about 150 feet or 45 meters in depth. Where the shaft ends, a 75-foot or 25-meter tunnel begins, sloping diagonally downwards to the water-bearing deposits. The purpose of the water system was to supply local residents with water even at times of drought and invading armies without having to draw it from the springs outside the city. A modern steel structure was built for the modern visitors. The way down is easy, but climbing up is a challenge, although worth the experience. Next, we have what is a temple, or what many call a palace complex. Many today are changing and saying it's a temple because in front of this complex area is an altar. So once again, some say it's a temple, some say it's a palace. We'll refer to it in both ways. So the ruins of this temple or palace complex are sheltered by this large roof, protecting them from wear. The temple or palace complex was used by the kings of Hazor from around 1500 BC to the time of the conquest by the Israelites in 1405 BC. A ritual, low-lying platform was uncovered in the palace, and at the top of the stairs leading to the entrance there are two giant basalt pillars. A throne room was also found in the middle of this palace temple complex. At the front of this complex is what appears to be an altar. So you had this altar facing the east, then you would enter into what is believed this temple, or what some say this palace complex. There has also been found in this temple or palace complex a massive burn layer that clearly shows it was burnt by fire. This proves it was destroyed by the Israelites as mentioned in the Bible, and we'll talk more about this burn layer later. There is also a Canaanite passage between the lower and upper city. A new section of the 3,500-year-old monumental staircase leading up to the Canaanite palace was revealed in 2019. The staircase is 15 feet wide, or about 4.5 meters wide, and made of large basalt slabs. 7 steps were unearthed so far in this section. Here, part of the wall was dismantled in order to reveal the basalt stairs which, in the Canaanite period, led from the upper to the lower city. From this point, it is possible to see the remains of a large building, in the center of which is a ritual, low-lying platform generally used for a throne of some sort made out of smooth basalt stones dating to the time just before the conquest of the Israelites in 1405 BC. The surface of this platform is made of a single basalt slab weighing around 2 tons. There are 4 indentations in the center of the slab, perhaps for a throne. We also have in the lower and upper city a number of Canaanite temples that have been discovered from different periods when the Canaanites inhabited this area. And there have been found these standing stones as well, both in the lower and the upper areas as mentioned. These cultic objects, or these standing stones and shrines, provide clear insights about how Canaanite worship of false gods occurred here and was denounced in the Bible and commanded to be destroyed by the Israelites. Now, during the Israelite period, we will see a 6-chamber gate, a gate with 6 rooms and 2 towers dating to around 950 or 930 BC can be found during the Israelite period. The gate was most likely built by King Solomon according to the form that was common to this period and similar to the gates at Gezer and Megiddo, which are 6-chamber gates as well. The 3 chambers on each side could be used to protect the city against invaders, as soldiers could attack from all sides from within those coming in. Often there was a platform above each chamber where soldiers could attack from above as well. During times of peace, the chambers could be used for meetings, negotiation, issuing judgments, and so forth. To the south of the gate are the remains of a casemate city wall from the same period. Now this casemate city wall consists of 2 parallel walls with a space between them. During times of war, the inner space could be filled to broaden the wall and make it more difficult to penetrate, and during times of peace, it was used as storage. Beneath the middle room, in the southern wing of the gate, the basalt threshold of a Canaanite temple was found. Once again, this Canaanite temple is one of 4 that have been found in this upper city area. We also see remains of the Israelite city in this upper section here. In the western side of the upper city are the ruins of an Israelite city from the 9th century. The city fell in 732 BC, as it says in 2 Kings 15:29. It says, "In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Hazor and carried them captive to Assyria." On the western edge of the city are remains of this Israelite tower, dating to around the 8th century BC. This tower was the last Israelite construction in Hazor, built to strengthen the defenses before the Assyrian onslaught. We can also see some reconstructed buildings. In the northwest area, the excavators rearranged 2 facilities that were originally located over the Canaanite palace. They were removed and reconstructed in order to reach the lower levels under the Canaanite palace. Here you can see a reconstructed 8th century BC public storehouse with pillars. A reconstructed oil press also was found from the 8th century BC and has been placed here as well so that you can see it. The stone weight on the edge of the lever pushed the stone on the basket and squeezed the olives, extracting the precious olive oil onto the grooves of the base stone. Now, something also that is very interesting about Hazor is that normally when conquering armies would destroy a city, they would carefully preserve the gods of that city and add them to their other gods that they worshiped. In their thinking, this would give them even more power for their kingdom. Interestingly, the false gods of Hazor were destroyed by the Israelites. This was a direct command by God and revealed He was the only true God to be worshiped. This also proves that it was the Israelites who destroyed Hazor, because other armies would not do it, because once again they would preserve those gods, thinking that those gods would then help them later on. Now, just a brief history of Hazor, so that you can just better understand briefly. We'll talk more later about this, but Hazor seems to be first inhabited around 2800 BC by the Canaanites. There have been many different civilizations of the Canaanites that have lived here, as once again there have been found 21 different layers of civilizations. Then in around 1405 BC, the Israelites conquered Hazor, as found in Joshua 11. It was then re-inhabited by the Canaanites in the period of the Judges, and God used the Canaanites to oppress Israel because of their disobedience. Hazor was then again destroyed about 170 years later in 1235 BC by the Israelites. It would later then be rebuilt and fortified by Solomon in around 960 BC. Later, King Ahab fortified it as well in around 875 BC, and then it would fall to the Assyrians in around 732 BC. Now let's look at the biblical events that took place here. They include miraculous victories and staggering defeats. Finally, we'll have a faith lesson at the end to see how it all applies to our lives today. So be sure and watch this video to the end. So as we see in Scripture, we can see that when Jabin, king of Hazor, heard that Joshua and the Israelites had been on a conquering rampage throughout all the southern part of the land and had been victorious, he gathered a host of kings in the northern part of the land to unite and fight against the Israelites. Now I should mention that the name Jabin will appear again in Judges 4 when Hazor is again conquered by the Israelites some 170 years later. This name Jabin is a dynastic name like Pharaoh or Caesar and is not his actual name. So again, to help us see how massive this miracle was, it says in Joshua 11, "Then they came out, speaking about all these kings, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots." So all these kings gathered together and came and encamped together at the waters of Merom, which is just north of Hazor, just a little bit, to fight against Israel. So all these kings unified themselves, believing that with their countless armies and countless gods, Israel would be no match for them. But here Joshua conquered many kings who had gathered, who had rallied. They had heard what Joshua was doing in the southern part of Israel. And so they unified all these kings together up here, believing that all of their armies, all of their kingdoms, all of their power, and especially all of their gods would be able to overwhelm Joshua and the God of Israel. But we know the story of what happened. God gave Joshua amazing victory here. So God told Joshua and the Israelites not to be afraid of them, for he would be with Israel and deliver all these kings into their hands. In Joshua 11 it says, "Then Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hazor, and struck its king with the sword. For Hazor formerly was the head of all these kingdoms." So once again, it was a large tell here, one of the largest cities of the Canaanites, rivaled Nineveh in importance, but God struck down the king here. And it says that they struck down every person who was in it with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was no one left who breathed. And he burned Hazor with fire. So Joshua and the Israelites burned Hazor here with fire. And interestingly, we can still see the burn marks, the fire marks in the excavations here. And I'll show you right here in this video, you can see these. So I'm going to actually show you some of the burn marks, these stones here. You can see this burn line, and you can see how these stones cracked because of the heat. This was from Joshua when he burned the city, Tel Hazor, with fire. I'm going to swing around over here. You can actually see some of the ash deposit here, and this is from the layer when Joshua was here. So you can see right down in there, you can see that ash. It says, "Please do not touch," or I'd put my finger on there, and other people have, but I won't. And you can actually see the ash layer from when Joshua burned Hazor with fire, according to the Bible. And right over here, you can see some of these stones here. When stones get really hot, they crack. So this is just absolute evidence of the historical biblical account. God's word is true. You see that. You see the ash line right along there in these cracked walls. So absolutely amazing. Now you might be wondering how you could burn a city built from stone. Well, they didn't actually burn the stones, but what they did was to pile enormous amounts of wood around the walls and buildings and then light it all on fire. The fire would get so hot that it would crack and break all the walls and buildings. So Joshua captured all the cities of these kings and all their kings, and he struck them with the edge of the sword and utterly destroyed them, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. Now Hazor was rebuilt by the Canaanites and continued to be used by God to punish Israel for their disobedience to God in the book of Judges. So Joshua had captured Hazor here, But later on, because of Israel's disobedience, and we see it in the book of Judges, these cycles where the Israelites would fall, get into sin, God would deliver them. They would rise up, get right with the Lord, then they would drift from the Lord and fall, and then God would punish them. So the Canaanites retook Hazor once again and used it to punish the Israelites because of their disobedience to God in their valleys, so to speak. It says in Joshua 4:2, "And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, the king of Canaan." Now this was a different Jabin than the first one Joshua conquered. It was a later Jabin who reigned in Hazor. And the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Hesherath Hagoim. Now later Hazor came under the control of Israel during the period of King David and Solomon. So King David, he was a warrior, and in essence, interestingly, King David fulfilled in large part what the Israelites could never do. They were told to conquer all of the land, but they failed to do so. Under the Judges and during that period of the book of Judges, once again, the Israelites did not capture and take all of the land like they were commanded to do. So it was David who really fulfilled that command. So once again, then he came and overtook Hazor here, and it came under his control, and then also later then Solomon, David's son, as well. And it says in 1 Kings 9, it says, "It was rebuilt and fortified by Solomon." Now this is the account of the forced labor which King Solomon levied to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, his own house in Jerusalem, the Millo, and the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, right here, Megiddo, another tell, and you can see that in one of our videos, and Gezer, and you can see that as well. So these were tells on the Via Maris strategic locations that Solomon then fortified so that he could control Israel and have peace. Now later, because of Israel's continued disobedience, so we have the cycle of the Judges where they're up and down. David comes on the scenes, bring Israel to its glory year, Solomon as well. But Solomon planted the seeds of destruction by marrying many foreign wives and building altars all around Jerusalem to those foreign wives. And then after Solomon, then the kingdom of Israel split. And Jeroboam took the northern tribes, and Rehoboam took the southern two tribes of Benjamin and Judah. Now, Hazor was destroyed by the Assyrians in 732 BC as a result of Israel's disobedience to God. This is the time the 10 northern tribes of Israel were deported and led away into captivity to Assyria. And a few stayed here, but we call them the 10 lost tribes because the majority of the people were taken away and never to return. And it's a very, very sad situation that happened. So Jeremiah, because of Israel's disobedience after Solomon under Jeroboam and these other evil kings that had risen, and Israel's continued disobedience, and Jeremiah prophesied just before and right during the time of Israel's captivity to the Babylonians in 586 BC. And he prophesied against Hazor, and he says in Jeremiah 49, "Hazor will become a haunt of jackals, a desolation forever. No one will live there, nor will a son of man reside in it." And it's amazing that this site that was highly sought after and this prime location is now a desolate place. And you can see in this video, this city, which was huge in size, about 200 acres, 10 times as big as Jerusalem, rivaled Nineveh. And here it is today. I mean, as you look around, it's barren. There's a few people, tourists here, but it's barren and it's prime location. Anyway, God, when He speaks, has authority and power, and He carries out His will. So we should be warned. We should be warned that God is a God of grace, but He's not a God to be toyed with. And when we continually disobey Him, like the Israelites did, God steps in, and His patience has a limit. And when He sees people in continual disobedience with no desire to turn back, then God will oftentimes step in. So what are some faith lessons we can learn from this place here at Hazor? Well, the conquest of this city is probably one of the most overlooked miracles in the Bible. When we realize that the king of this city gathered many other kings from this area so that they were as numerous as the sand on the seashore to fight against the Israelites, we see how it was only God who could have given them the victory. In the same way, If we are right with God and pleasing to Him, then He too will give us victory over any issue or trials in our lives that we might be facing. However, if we are disobedient to God, then He might raise up problems in our lives to correct us and bring us back to Him, just like He did with the Israelites. Another faith lesson is that God stepped in and judged the Israelites because of their continual disobedience. So Joshua conquered this, and then because of Israel's disobedience, they lost it. And then we have these cycles back and forth. And then David once again conquers it, Solomon fortifies it, and then Israel falls right back into these same patterns. So it's just a sad history of neglect of God, disobedience. And one thing I might say about the Israelites is they had a tendency to presume upon God's grace, believing that because they were the chosen ones, believing that because they had the temple and all of these events, they believed that they were kind of immune to God's punishment. Now, we as believers, we're saved by grace, and that's a fact, but we should remember that grace is not to be presumed upon, and even when we do sin, God forgives, but there are still consequences to that sin. And we can see the reality here. We can see dryness here. We see barrenness. And that can be what happens in our lives when we disobey God. We can go into a time of barrenness and a time of pain and difficulty. So anyway, amazing things happened right here at Tel Hazor. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and God bless.